we're super happy here at A&H to have one of our former artists in residence, Elisabeth Condon, with us. She's in the midst of all this craziness and this hardship for a lot of people. She's been having some great success. She just had a really beautiful feature in a New York Times article with her painting dead center in the image, which I was so happy to see. Deserved to be there, by the way. So we're just going to go through 3 questions with Elisabeth. Elisabeth, do you want to say hi and introduce yourself, or?
I do. I do. Hi to everyone, and thanks for watching. And I want to give a shout out to Maitland, where I was artist in residence in 2017, and I went back in 2018. It had a big influence, and maybe that'll come up in our conversation.
Okay, great. Well, listen. Your work is wonderful. You're this incredible painter. You do these large-scale works on paper. The first question I had for you was, you have this ability to go back and forth between this kind of controlled chaos and this very kind of manicured or like controlled elements. And is this something that you've arrived at because it keeps your work that life force that you've spoken about? It's really evident in your work, and this kind of like balance that you have to achieve. Is that the reason that you have these 2 hands going on? Is that?
Well, I'm really influenced by Chinese brush painting.
Okay.
Yuan dynasty painting, like 14th century, and that type of painting demands a balance of elements. And you could say with a history of, I was brought up in a religious household that was really intensely decorated, and yet it was Los Angeles in the 1970s, so it was pretty wild.
Wild, right.
Always been these kind of extreme oppositions in both my personal life and then in my impulses. And so Chinese painting, with its philosophy of balance, introduced an approach that I could take on linen and paper to perhaps using both together rather than trying to expel one or the other.
Right. Well, listen, when I did a stint where I worked as a visual coordinator at Christie's, and one of my favorite exhibitions that we got to set up was the Korean and the Chinese scrolls, and the presence that they have is just like, it's to be, I know people see them in a museum, but to be up close to them, to handle them, it was breathtaking. You really realize that there was so much, like you said, there's so much control of like this controlled chaos of allowing this thing out of the bag and then just kind of like keeping it at that edge between it before it bled over into something that was, it was so beautiful. It was so beautiful, and I see that in your work. It is really, but the beautiful thing about it is there's also this reconciling for me of this Eastern and Western. It's not just like you're doing this homage to, to Eastern painting or Eastern, brush painting. There's this kind of like beautiful playfulness that is like a real Western philosophy, right?
That is really great of you to say, and it really is articulate, because it's important. I practice scroll painting techniques. I mean, I get the mulberry paper out and I have, a mixing dish and an ink stick, but in living in China for 6 months, in practicing those techniques now for, probably 15 years.
Wow, yeah.
I realized, well, off and on, I realized I would never be a Chinese person. Like, I would never speak fluent Chinese. I mean, I've given, Mandarin 1 a crack like 3 or 4 times.
Right.
I mean, I've tried very hard to kind of adapt or ingest the principles of painting and I mean, what's so interesting is the way that making a mark in ink holds both abstraction and representation within it. You hold the idea of the flower or the plant in your mind, you put it down, and ideally the liveliness, the inner life, as you put it, of the brushstroke will record the form. And the ink is being breathed into the paper, because the paper is literally inhaling the ink.
Right.
I'm going to actually circle back to your question, though. But
please. This is great. This is really, people need to understand this. Like, there is a complete difference in sensibility when it comes to thinking about language, and
Oh yeah. And so the paper inhales the ink, and so the ink really records. Like, the way you move your hand is extremely important. So I realized I could never, and because I didn't grow up with calligraphy, and that's sort of the basis of pictorial form in traditional Chinese painting, not now. But I realized I could never have it, no matter how hard, that I could spend the rest of my life trying to get it, and I'd be this kind of, wannabe Chinese painter. And And I come from LA, the film industry, the Flintstones, the Gilligan's Island, like television cartoons, that's a sensibility in Florida. When I moved to Florida, that it kind of brought me back to that. And that's what got me interested in Chinese painting, was the overlap environments. I thought, what language could I employ to talk about this overlay of landscapes that I'm experiencing, this intense deja vu between 1960 and 2003. So that's some of the history behind it, and then the practice. So why not, just to really directly answer your question, why not graft Chinese painting techniques into Western sensibility? Why not take an acrylic brush and load it with 3 different colors like you would on an ink brush, and try to see what happens, like in this painting of sunflower. Happened. And pouring, there's this, Chinese painting lineage is all about these stories, like the monk who would drink a lot of wine, and then under the full moon would paint with his pigtail, impetuously loading it with ink and slapping it onto the mulberry.
Exactly, right.
Spontaneous shapes. And so that's also where pouring came from. And so why not meld these techniques of pouring and then applying the loaded brush to around the pour and making form, and then you get to pictorially invent whatever it's coming up to be.
Oh, that's awesome. It's funny you say that, because when I taught 3 classes at Stony Brook University right before I moved down, and Stony Brook has a sister university in Beijing, and so there was a lot of Asian population at Stony Brook in Long Island where I taught. And so my art classes were probably a third, Asian transfer students and stuff like that. And here they'd be having their conversations in Mandarin or whatever, and one day I said to this girl, really, brilliant student, I said, oh my God, could I ever inhabit, that space, And she was so nice. She's like, no, and she was being, she wasn't being condescending. She was just being honest, she had just grown up in, for me to come at it from the outside, I could possibly learn, to converse with certain words and this and that, but I'll never fully understand that the history and breadth of that there, So I think what I'm trying to say is, I think it's so, the beautiful thing about your paintings is they're so honestly you. You know what I mean? You're not you're not trying to, there's this vibrancy and this honesty about them that is so accessible for the viewer, because there is no pretense, if you were trying to be, like you said, this Western person doing this, this ancient, art form, it would come off as a little labored, I think, but your work isn't that. It's just honestly saying that these are the things that influenced me. I remember you talking to me once, and you mentioned wallpaper, that wallpaper has a big influence on you. You remember back from your mother's house, and I see that in your work too. It's this beautiful playfulness between this this static kind of wallpaper image, and then this explosion that comes out of it. And it really is you. If somebody met you and knew you, they would be like, oh my God, this is literally like an honest translation of who Elisabeth is, you know? So that's just, for me, that's great that you can be and operate at that level, you know?
Well, it took a long time to get to. I mean, there was plenty of pretense, both, you know, initially for the history of Western figuration, and then later Chinese painting. And, you know, the painting of the sunflower for 6 months, I'd taken, speaking of Stony Brook, I'd taken a class at the China Institute in Lower Manhattan with Sung-Suk Setone, a Korean painter who's married to a professor at Stony Brook, who's a Chinese specialist.
Okay, right.
Chinese. And so I did nothing for 6 months but ink painting. Nothing.
Wow.
I made I kept about 50, and I'm sure I made triple that amount of ink painting.
Right.
Without barely going to the studio, barely painting in acrylic. So when I made Sunflower, I'd just arrived in Florida. I'd ordered maybe 10 stretchers, because this is a painting. This is on
right.
I ordered 10 stretchers of, I think they were 52 by 40. So really a nice size.
Right.
And I was so pent up from having practiced ink painting and not having had color. I mean, I had Chinese color, but not the full gamut of golden acrylic.
Right.
So I just went nuts. You know,
they're incredible.
Yeah, and so it was. So sometimes I will hold back like that to
right.
Because the thing you said, you used the term life-giving, and I have to say that prolonged practice of brush painting techniques is really, you really are moving forward with a focused idea. You're open to circumstance, but you're also very focused on the form you want to articulate. I'm going to paint a bamboo. I'm going to paint a bamboo.
Right.
Bamboo in the wind. I'm going to paint a bamboo in the rain. Those are 3 different discussions. And you have the vocabulary from practice. It's like a sport. You practice over and over again, and then you form the painting. So that's
really interesting. Right.
That's why you see all the calligraphy masters creating this document with this crowd of onlookers. It's really considered a performance.
Right. That's interesting. Yeah.
And so one way that I adapt that in my own private process is in this way to hold. I took that class, you know, it was like a 10-week class. I took it 3 times. And then I just came into the studio and I was so pent up. And then I could perform just spontaneously what I'd learned, but integrating it in my own way. Right.
Well, you know, what's funny? I was thinking, I was looking at your work before we got online together, and this one word kept on going over, this word ecstatic, right? This kind of like, it's funny, but it was like this, and then I said, well, you know what, let me look at the definition of ecstatic. I know what it means, but let me see if there's other, and this one great definitions, like lower definition came up, and it said mystic self-transcendence. And I was thinking, oh my God, like that's so, like, you know, I knew that was what I was feeling, and I knew the word was right, but I was thinking, what is the actual like breakdown of that word? And when I saw that, I was like, that's exactly what I get from your work. You know, this really honest, like it's your life force that's coming across, and the ability for you to translate it through the materials is really impressive. It really is. It's not something where it takes time. People don't understand that it takes time for an artist to get to that place, you know.
Oh my God! But you've got to get rid. Didn't Picasso say, you know, to copy yourself as a child, to paint as a child?
Right.
What Augustine say, when you're in the room, you want to knock out every influence one by one until even you're missing.
Right. Exactly. Right.
I mean, and you know, again, I grew up in an extremely religious background.
Right.
So the idea of code switching was always prevalent, to kind of go back between this healing modality of affirming what spiritually you might know to be true versus being in the world. And it always felt like two things, but painting made it feel like one thing.
Wow, that's really beautiful. Yeah, yeah, yeah. But that's exactly. It's funny that you brought that up because, you know, when I was at SVA, I went to SVA for my undergrad, and in the 80s, and New York in the 80s was exciting. It was like raw and gritty, and but there was something where I had these two hands going on. Like I could do the really kind of like gestural and kind of explosive stuff, and then I could do the detailed stuff. But the hard part that people don't understand is when you have to go like this, you know, like the melding of the two hands and the balance. That's the, you know, that's the game, right? And if you could do that, but that's something that you're occupying in these paintings, you know, especially the three that they're gonna come up on the screen as we're talking, you know, especially the sunflower one. Yeah.
People will be going crazy otherwise. They'll be like, what are they talking
Oh,
about?
no, exactly. No. We're gonna put them up. So listen, like the other two, I think we've covered like two questions. So the third one, and we've kind of touched on it, but I don't think people understand that when you're working this way, right? With this, you have this beautiful wrestling match going on. You have to reconcile that in this balance, this acrobatic balance. It's funny you mentioned to me before we started about this one scroll painting, and you said it had like trapeze artists and stuff, you know, going on, and I was thinking how funny that is, because when I think of your work, when I was writing up one of these questions, I thought of this acrobatic thing that's going on where if you push it one more little nuanced way in one way or another, it would lose itself, you know. So it's very conscious that you're aware of that, but to achieve that is difficult, you know.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think it's, you know, every day you go in there and I mean, I think ink painting practice is really helpful for this, because you know, a painting of a bamboo, I mean, this is idiom practice, but a painting of a bamboo plant might take 3 minutes, and you've either got it or you don't, and you crumple it up and throw it away.
Right.
So it makes it easier in a way to let things go if you have to. And
Right.
it's a high risk game, you know.
Right.
You risk the canvas. And this was at the beginning of preparing for a solo exhibition last year at Emerson Dorsch in Miami, my gallery.
Right.
Exhibition called, speaking of ecstatic, Effulgence. So
that's great. Yeah.
And that means like really vivid, saturate color.
Right.
Takes you to that state of ecstasy, as does, I want to make this a mention, American visionary painting, like Charles Birchfield. That
Right.
himself was both wallpaper designer and Chinese scholar.
Oh, interesting.
Yes.
And that's really great you mentioned that, because his works on paper are some of my favorite ever. They're just so, you know, he inhabits this space that is so unique, and, you know, and there's that vibrancy of the color is exactly what you're talking about.
I really, really feel that he bridges worlds, and he goes deeper than anyone else I can think of offhand in American painting history.
Right. That's awesome. Yeah. No, that's great. You mentioned him because, like I said, when I was up in New York, I think I went to the Met, and they had a showing of his works on paper, you know, and his watercolors are just, oh my God. But it's exactly what you're talking about. He has this. It's a similar conversation going on between taking that Eastern philosophy and reconciling it with this, you know, Western sensibility and Western landscapes. You know, like they're very American, like the landscapes, you know, but they have this kind of transcendent quality to them as well. Yeah.
Well, he loved, you know, I mean, I remember there's a story where he got an invitation from MoMA to come down to his exhibition opening, and he was like, nope, I'm going to stay here and garden. I mean,
that is great.
You know, I used to think that the answer lay in China. I mean, I've been to China 7 times. My last trip there, I was there for 6 months. And I will tell you, there's nothing quite like the Chinese landscape. I mean, there's a reason why.
Right.
There's a Chinese landscape painting tradition. But what really got me going on Chinese landscape was Florida.
Wow, okay.
The relationship of Florida to LA. And so I really have to say that I am quite interested now in where I live in Florida. And
Oh, that's great. That's really great to hear. Yeah, yeah.
yeah. I mean, really finally paying tribute in the way that Richfield painted, you know, his environment in upstate New York. I mean, everybody has a place inside of them.
No, absolutely. Yeah, yeah. You know, it's funny. I wanted to make this one reference, and I didn't notice it until looking at the works before we started talking. Was there's almost this, you know, here we're talking about this transcendence, but there's this beautiful playfulness in your backgrounds that really make reference to pop art, like almost like you know, like you're the ones. I want to make a reference to, you know, we've talked about Sunflower. We could have just talked about Sunflower for 3 hours. It's that great a painting. But no, but the brick wall and the yellow lattice, you know, those two paintings as well. One of them has this kind of like great kind of outlined in black lattice pattern in the back, but to me it felt really poppy. You know what I mean? It felt like, which to me I always thought was like the utmost of playfulness. You know what I mean? It was great. And then the same thing with the brick painting. It had this kind of like, it wasn't as heavily delineated as the lattice, but it still had this feeling of like this almost like pop art kind of like play. And I think maybe that goes back to the wallpaper then. Maybe that's where I'm seeing that, right? That kind of incorporating the memory, because you talked about the memory of the wallpaper, right?
The wallpaper is in the background of
okay.
Yellow Lattice.
Oh, okay, so interesting, right?
Paper that I grew up with. I have a little sample. I wish I remembered. I would show it to you, but
okay.
I have it in my studio. And so I painted it so many times that I memorized.
Oh my goodness.
So now I just paint it freestyle, and it's kind of a foil for the poured flowers. And that's from the Emerson Dorsch exhibition, that painting.
Right.
And that is, and so I did a whole bunch of those paintings. Like I didn't produce them in the sense of a production line, but I made a series that kept building on the language of the previous painting.
Yeah, they're wonderful, you know. Yeah. And I was so happy I got to go down to your gallery and in Miami. I went down. I made a point to drive down from Orlando, and I saw your show there. And if you're in Miami, you have to go to this gallery. And even if you're not in Miami, you should make a pilgrimage to go there, because it's a beautiful gallery. I love the neighborhood it's nestled in. It's kind of like this really vibrant neighborhood. And so congratulations on that, you know.
Well, thank you. And Brick Wall is more recent than the other two.
So okay, right.
Are Emerson Dorsch, and the Brick Wall is a New York painting that I made after, you know, when I got back. I went during the show at Emerson Dorsch, I had a residency at MacDowell, and so MacDowell is in New Hampshire, so that's
right.
And it was during the fall, so it was really quite wonderful. I was making all these green and red paintings, and then I went back to New York and I made this painting. I think I made this painting most recently, Brick Wall, and it just got really crazy. I thought, because during the when I was preparing the Effulgent show, I was pouring acrylic more and more aggressively to start not a pool of illusionistic space, but an aggressive, outwardly projective shape.
Right.
I would have to deal with as a painter. Like, what am I going to do with this thing? Like, I got heavier and heavier. Like, I'm using this acrylic. I'm not using ink. I'm using plastic that curdles and ruins. And how far can I push it? Like, and then I get a palette knife and I dig into the surface like I'm drilling into a construction site. And then some parts, like the white area is empty canvas. So, like in Chinese scrolls, I always leave an area of
right.
But the rest of it is really built up and dug into and scarred and beaten up, like any New York surface worth its salt, you know?
Yeah, right. It's amazing though. It with all that going on. Like I said, it kind of arrives at this kind of really kind of beautiful balance, and it has this kind of quiet. It's funny, there's so much energy coming from it, but it sits in this place where it's not screaming, you know. I mean, it has this place where it's kind of like this. It's really kind of happy in its own place, you know, which is which if you try to do that with a lot of materials and just let them out of the bag like that, you're going to get, you know what I mean? You're going to get some crazy results. And I think this painting's, yeah, out of all of them, when this comes up on the screen, people will see that this is really like you're pushing the boundaries of this pouring method, right? You're like, yeah,
But I'm
beautiful.
also, because of brush painting, I'm trying to control it so that
Right.
it doesn't go all over, so that it's not in, it is kind of insane, but there's a logic to it that can be, it's insane in the sense that it's wilder than, oh, I'm going to make a painting of a flower. Most people wouldn't think of this,
Right,
but it's
right.
not insane in the sense that there's a logic of plant forms and wall, weeds and wall, if you will, or some kind of, windowsill.
Right,
Any
right.
other narrative you want to apply, there's a self-containment or logic inside the painting, and that comes from brush painting. And I also wanted to make mention of Maitland for a moment, because one of the things in residency at Maitland that struck me the most was that Smith, who grew up initially in Asia, then lived in Europe, but was an American.
Right, right.
Worked hard to integrate various approaches and symbology in his cast concrete panels.
Exactly, right.
Gods depicting Chinese gods, and then also Jesus.
Right,
so
right,
it's
right.
kind of like world building, with all the things.
Exactly, right.
In your life. And talk about pop art, because,
exactly.
because we all live in kind of a pop art condition as we quote and requote from a history that is simultaneous online, especially now in quarantine.
Right. Well, the beautiful thing about it, when I was on Instagram when I first came across these pieces that we spoke about today, and the great thing about it was they just stopped me. We kind of scroll so quickly through, and we digest images at a really kind of horrible rate. We don't give them their due. But the great thing about yours, where they just stopped me and they were like, okay, I want to be here for a moment. I don't want to. These aren't disposable. They're not something you digest quickly. You need to give them their due. You need to give them their time. And it was wonderful for me as a painter, as an artist myself. It was just so refreshing that I can still have that experience. You know what I mean? Of just being stopped in my tracks. So thank you for that.
Thank you. That's a beautiful tribute. Thank you.
Well, listen, I think we've arrived at that place then. Are you happy with everything we've talked about?
I am.
Good. And you make reference to your gallery one more time. Emerson Deutsch, right?
Emerson Deutsch. Yeah, they're in Little Haiti in Miami. When we get through this, they're going to reopen, and we'll all be open, and everyone can see everything.
That's great. Do you have a show planned out there in the future, or is it just something we should wait for?
I've shown there every 2 years.
Okay.
And so last year I had a show, so 2021, likely. I don't know what their schedule is now that they've had to close and kind of push everything back.
Right.
The show also has a catalog.
Okay.
And I think I sent one to Maitland. So.
Oh, okay. I haven't seen it. Yeah.
Okay. So anyway, there's a catalog if you want to take a look. I'll send you one, and then.
Oh, that's kind of you, right?
Gallery has some copies for interested parties.
Okay, absolutely.
And also on the website. It's on the gallery website.
Okay.
Emerson. Yeah.
Emerson Deutsch, right? Well, listen, You've been incredibly generous with your time as usual, and thank you so much. I'm so happy we could begin this 3 questions thing with you. It kind of sets the bar again, like we want it to be, and now I have to just stay at this place. So thank you.
Thank you, Dan.
And listen, I'm so happy you're well. I'm happy to see on Instagram you're in your studio producing, and that's the main thing. So just be safe, be well, and again, thank you for today.
Thank you so much. And thank you everyone for listening.
Thank you.